Hi family, my name is Peter and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to thank Kirk for inviting me to share my story tonight. I'd like to get that out of the way up front in the event that I should offend any of you over the next few hours that we're together with anything I might say. You'll know who to go talk to about that. This is my home group. I don't know what you're looking for in a home group. If you don't have a home group, whether you want to hear some words or you'd like to see some action or you just want to feel good or whatever. But my sponsor gave me some advice, my first sponsor in Texas. A long time ago, he said, when you go looking for a home group, he said, look for one that's got a heart and look for it with your heart too, and the rest of it will fall into place. And this group meets on Tuesdays and Saturday nights, and I can tell you that the heart beats well here in this hotbed of mental health. So we welcome you if you're looking for a home group. My sobriety date is February 7th of 1994. I sobered up in Abilene, Texas. I was born and raised in Connecticut, so I'm going to try and connect some of them dots between Connecticut and Texas. Some of it will be in a general way, and some specifics you'll get. I was born into a middle-class family. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. 3 boys on top, triplet sisters on the bottom, and I'm the only alcoholic in the bunch. My mother's side of the family is Catholic, Canadian French, and my father's side of the family is Irish Catholic. To say I was predisposed to have a drink or two at birth would be an understatement. We had a crazy uncle that used to give each of us a Seagram 7 bottle at our christening with a nipple taped to the top of it. That would be a baby bottle nipple. Needless to say, mine did not quite make it until the appropriate age where I was to share it with my family, but my brothers and sisters did. I was on vacation with my mother and my brother and his wife in Orlando last October, and we were just kind of reminiscing about all kinds of stuff, and we got to talking about football, and I had remembered the day that I had become a New York Giant fan. I was about 5 years old, and all the men in the family were gathered around this great big cabinet. I'm going to date myself, with a TV not much larger than that book, watching the New York Giants and the Chicago Bears. And I just happened to like the color of that New York Giant team, and they got their butts kicked that day. And you know something? That ruined my whole day. I think that's the first day that my isms appeared without the alcohol, because I was angry. It was personal, and it shouldn't have been, but it was. And they all laughed, and I thought they were laughing at me, but I was just a funny little kid, and I didn't know that at the time. I actually am a product of a blended family. I don't remember an awful lot about my childhood. My biological father was quite the drinker, quite the skirt chaser, and quite the professional businessman, I might add, too. He kind of left the picture somewhere around 8 years old. My mother had enough of that stuff, and my next younger brother and I were fortunate to have this guy come into our life. I say we were fortunate, but they acted fortunate. I didn't. I had found someone that I could blame all of my discomfort on, and I could take my anger out on. I think I was just born angry. And always looked for a place to vent it, and didn't seem to have to look too far to do that. This guy just created a great environment for us. I remember taping plastic on the inside of the windows in a duplex in Newington, Connecticut, when there was just the 4 of us, because it was so damn cold that we couldn't stay warm. And the walls were so thin we could hear the landlord fart next door. And that's where we started from. And this guy had a plan for us and the family, and he took us all forward. And I really resented him the whole time we went forward in life. And then I found some things that began to kind of help me act out some of these discomforts that I had. I found sports, I found academics, and I found music. But I recognized real quick that I had an identity crisis real early, because I had no problem with everybody knowing I was a jock, but I had a real problem with the jocks knowing that I knew musical people and people who actually got good grades. So I was always self-conscious of who I was with, and I never really understood why until much later down the road. I had a football injury at about 15 and a half, 16 years old, and that took me out of a bunch of scholarships, and I got angry at God about that time. And so that kind of completed the circle. There weren't too many more people or entities I could get mad at. I completed high school early, and I just wanted to get out of Dodge. So joined the Air Force, and went to basic training in San Antonio, Texas, took my tech school in Denver, Colorado. And then I put in my wish list, which was supposed to be Hawaii, Southern California, and Florida. And I ended up at No Hope Pope in Fayetteville, North Carolina in 1972. So I was a young kid, and just barely 18 years old, and that's when my drinking really began to accelerate. All the professionals in the military during the Vietnam War really seemed to know how to do all that stuff and didn't mind taking a young fellow like me under his wing. I began to find ways to beat the system pretty quick, especially when it came to hangovers. My first roommate was a med tech, and there's nothing like oxygen-enriched air in the morning when you're not feeling real good after a whole bunch of drinking the night before. The problem with that is that it makes you real hungry. And I remember going to the mess hall at about 6 in the morning with all the guys we used to drink with, and my buddy and I would be shoveling down that breakfast, and they'd be turning green watching us do that, trying to hold theirs down. So I finally discovered some more things to do while I was in the Air Force. I started playing music professionally, played a lot of the nightclubs. I actually started making more money on a weekend than I did all month long while I was in the military. And that's not good for an 18-year-old kid that loves to drink, a pocket full of money. Richard Nixon decided to de-escalate the Vietnam War, so I got out early after about 2 years instead of 4, because I wanted to pursue that music career. And things just seemed to open up for me, always. I went on the road for almost 2 years, played some fantastic places, had a crossroads, and there's several of them in my life, where I actually had an opportunity to make something of myself. I was offered some recording studio jobs in Nashville, Tennessee at the time, but I just wasn't into those 8 to 5 jobs in the small rooms. I liked the big nightclubs, and I liked being able to drink when I played the drums, and I liked being able to socialize, and I liked being able to do things the way I wanted to do them. You hear a lot of I's in there, and that's the way I live my life. I was also easily bored with things. I would always fall into some kind of discontent with whatever I was doing. So I never really did anything for very long, and that was one of them too. Shortly after about 2 years, I got out of that business, and I found my way back to Connecticut and went to work for a company in Windsor, a turbine company that manufactured trip turbines for the nuclear safety industry. And at a very young age, I managed to BS my way right into a real nice position, and had a great mentor, an old submarine commander from Louisiana, and he very quickly put me in a role of managing the manufacturing for their nuclear turbines. And at about 25 years old, my ego was beginning to inflate very quickly. Now that was my daytime appearance, and I'd managed to pick up a pretty little hostage at that time. And she and I got married, and against her parents' advice. And I found myself, that was my daytime image at the corporation, and my weekend image was laying on the floor in an oversized camper, headed to a beautiful house on Long Island, sipping Crown Royal and blowing some funny smoke out the back window of the camper. That's my nighttime image and my daytime image. These are the conflicts that I lived with to try and escape my own body and my own feeling. The God of my misunderstanding saved me a lot of times in my life. There were 3 automobile incidents that should have killed me. I put my car in for maintenance, and I borrowed my mother-in-law's car for that week. And I was quite intoxicated one night and ran a stop sign. It was the middle of the winter, and there was a snowplow without the plow on the front of it that was coming down the other road, and had a 3-prong aperture on the front of it, and 2 of them went in underneath my seat, and the second one came in behind my head and knocked the headrest off, and the car was suspended in the front of this snowplow when it finally came to a stop. I was so drunk I didn't really even have a scratch or a bruise. I kind of crawled out the other side of the car, and the ambulance came, the police came, everybody came, and I was sitting in the ambulance, and they looked me over. They said I was okay, so I left. I walked away, and all they got me for was reckless driving and running a stop sign. No breathalyzer test, no nothing. Consequences not paid on my behalf there. The next time I was, wasn't too much longer. I borrowed my father-in-law's truck. They weren't going to give me too many more vehicles after this. And I bought this house in Holland, Massachusetts on a lake, pretty little place, nice little log cabin. And I decided to go cut me down some trees, some big trees. And I had this beautiful wood stove that I was going to heat the place with. And I had parked the truck next to a tree that I was standing on to clear some limbs. And when I got to the final point of falling this 60-foot oak, it fell in the direction I wanted it to, but the pickup truck was still there. So it made the nicest little cut between the back of the cab and in front of the rear tires. It was now 2 vehicles. So that ended my Paul Bunyan days, if you will. Without any regard to, it was almost as if people owed me these things. I will later have a chance to make amends to this ex-wife and family down the road. A friend of mine took a position with American Airlines not too long after that down in Texas. This is how I got to Texas. And called me a few weeks later and said, "You've got to come to Texas. This place is great. You'll love it." He was what you might call a cooler at a local dance club. And how he transitioned from that to American Airlines is beyond me, but that was his thing to do. So within about 4 weeks, I was down there on about a 2-week vacation. And after about 6 days of pool parties and every other imaginable thing you can think of, we found ourselves leaning over the fence, looking at the South Fork Ranch. And I looked at him and I said, "I have got to come to Texas, because this is where it's going on. And all I'm looking for is the good feeling, and that's what's moving me around the country." So I got to Texas, and I ended up in Abilene. That's where I started, because my brother ended up getting stationed there. He was bringing the B-1B bombers online, and I thought we'd spend some time together. Well, they didn't have anything that remotely resembled my background in manufacturing. So I ended up going to work for an old retail outlet called Montgomery Ward's, and they weren't going to hire me at the time. I walked in there and gave this gal in HR my resume, and she says, you know, you're way overqualified for this position. I said, I know that. And she said, you know, you're just going to leave us when you find another job. I said, I know that too, but I'm not going to leave you hanging. And I said, just give me a break. Let me in the front door. So she let me in the front door. And there I stood in my three-piece suit and my floor shine boots, taking credit applications for minimum wage. And that store ended up having more credit apps than any other store in the region. Soon after that, I started selling furniture in that store within a few months, and we sold more furniture than we ever had. And shortly after that, within about 9 months, I was managing that store. And this is the way, these are the things that happened to me early in my drinking career. Everything opened up for me. No one saw through all the many masks that I put in front. Well, Montgomery Ward's finally closed down, went out of business. And I found this little Firestone store over on the corner, and I thought I'd go over there and chat with the kid that was running the place. He was probably about 8 years younger than me. And so I got over there, and I come from a family of pilots. He was a pilot. All we did was talk about flying and airplanes, and he was impressed. I was glad, and I got a job. And I didn't know that job would develop into what it did develop into. They gave me an old store out in Midland, Texas. If you've ever seen that movie Saturday Night Lights, the old football team that came out of that Odessa area, that's the exact year that I took that store over. And that store was about $500,000 down, and I spun it around in about 6 months, and then they decided, well, gee, maybe he can do something with the rest of our stores. So his dad was one of the 3 primary owners of about 120 of them, and I got to do my thing for about 8 years. And then my drinking and everything else began to escalate. I found myself at about 28 years old. I'm going to back up just a little bit. I was kind of raised in that industrial era where, you know, the 3 martini lunches were pretty normal. We smoked in the office. The last guy standing got the contracts, all that good stuff. And at about 27, 28 years old, my body was shot. I found myself not being able to drink as much for as long, and it took me much longer to recover. And then I discovered, and I'm going to mention these, the magic elixirs, which were speed and cocaine for me. I mention those because I'm an alcoholic that managed my drinking with drugs. I'm not a drug addict that drank. And that's just my story. But what happened was it propped me back up and allowed me to do all that stuff, just like I used to do, as hard as I used to do it, for about another 10 years. And after we sold this company that I went to work for in Texas, we sold that in '92. I spent the next 2 years bottoming. By now I had a wife and 3 daughters, and she had brought a son into the family. And I was pretty sick. I was actually had 1 foot in the grave. My organs were beginning to shut down. To say I was spiritually dead would be an understatement. And my personality was non-existent, and I was predatory and hostile, might be a couple of good words to use. Well, this pretty little Texas gal looked at me one day and said, "You need to leave. You need to go get well so I can get well." So I've never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, in any substantive capacity up to now. And whenever Nancy Reagan or anybody else said, just don't drink, I mean, I kind of toasted to that. I was always mocking the folks that never really fit my bill as far as what I wanted to do. So I found myself walking the streets of Abilene. And there was a hospital on the north end, there's a hospital on the south end. Both had detoxes, both had treatment centers, and I figured I'd make a beeline for the one on the north end. So it took me about 2.5 hours to get within sight of that. And I looked at that, I'm going to try and reveal a little bit about how my disease works between my ears. And about the time I looked at that hospital, I said, you know, that's the older hospital. The newer one on the south side of town would probably serve me better. So I spun around, and there's 10 miles between these two hospitals, and started walking toward that hospital. I made it about halfway, found myself sitting on the front steps of a church that I used to go to in the middle of the afternoon during the week. Have no idea why that pastor came by, but he did. He drove by the place and saw me sitting there and pulled in the parking lot. We had a long talk. I went through my boo-hoos, and he decided to put me up in a motel for 4 days and 3 nights. It just happened to be in the red light district of Abilene, Texas. And when we pulled up there, it had a pool that was empty. It was the middle of the winter. They had a bonfire going in the bottom of the pool. I could hear the music. You could see the smoke coming out of there, and it wasn't all from the bonfire. And I couldn't go join those people. I was done for some reason. I was tired. I was exhausted. Well, I spent the first 2 days in that room just locked in there, shades drawn, just in a dark room with a 1-800 number to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I finally called, and I got this guy on the phone, who would later become my first sponsor for the first 11 years in this program. First thing he asked me was, when was the last time I ate? And I told him it had been a couple days. And so he told me he'd be over in just a little bit. And he showed up in about 30 minutes, and he had a sleeve of saltine crackers, a can of Spam, 2 plastic forks, 2 plastic knives, and 2 bottles of water. And that was my first AA meal with an AA member. And he did something completely different than everybody else had ever done with me. He didn't lecture me. He didn't judge me. He didn't even talk about me. He started talking about himself, where he'd been, what he'd been through, what happened to him, and what's going on in his life today. And it was just something about this guy. Had I sobered up around Christmas, I would have just said, you got to be kidding me, because this guy is a little round man with white hair and a short white beard, and he looked just like Chris Kringle. I kid you not. But he gave me more insight and more incentive to change my life than any one man had ever done before, and there were lots of them that truly did care for me and love me. That's the power of this program. Anyhow, I couldn't stay there after the 4th day, so had to find a place to go. No one would take me back. All my bridges are burned, and we found the Salvation Army was about 3 miles on the other side of town. So he went and got some clothes for me, and I had a little duffel bag, and I found myself walking up the industrial boulevard that I used to drive up and down with so many other bankers and oilmen and cattlemen, trying not to look at anybody and mostly staring at my feet as I walked up there. I finally got to the Salvation Army, and my disease, well, I was still not beat. Damn near dead, but still not beat. And I walked around behind the building. I put my bag down next to a dumpster, walked back around, went in the front of the building, and just kind of acted like I was a county inspector or something. And I walked into place, and I went to the bathroom. I said hello to a few people and went right back out the front door. And thank God for this pretty little lieutenant gal in the Salvation Army. She knew exactly what I was doing there and why I needed to be there. And she didn't say a word to me. She let me do what I needed to do. And I went around behind that building, and I went to pick up my bag, and that's when 2 thoughts hit me. Everything that I had ever said or done was never going to work again. And the second one that scared the heck out of me was I had no idea what would. So I picked it up, and my bag up, and I went back inside and sat down and began to talk with the gal for a while. I'd made a commitment to a treatment center, but I didn't know how to fund it at this point, and I needed to get court committed. So I went in, and I had to go to present myself before the judge, and I just told him I needed help. this judge would later play a role in my life 7.5 years later. So I couldn't stay at the Salvation Army on a regular basis. I could stay only as a transient, which meant I had to get up at 5 in the morning and leave. I could have breakfast. I could come back for lunch. I had to leave, and I could come back for dinner. And I could sleep for the night. And this went on for 3 weeks until I got into the treatment center. I got into the treatment center, and I felt like I'd arrived at the Marriott because I'd been walking the streets. And first place they take us is an AA meeting, the first night that I'm there. And I heard a bunch of laughter. This was a grassroots building, very much like this. Smoke down to about the level of the top of the tables. And there was an atmosphere there, a spiritual atmosphere that just was attractive. And I began to listen to them talk, tell some stories, and they laughed at some of the most horrendous things in their life. And I couldn't fathom doing that with my own life and circumstances. And but I was attracted nonetheless by what was going on there. Then at the end of the meeting, they actually tricked me into becoming a member. You know, they started handing out these chips, and you know, they got to the white chip, or they started with the white chip, and they told me that I was the most important person in the room. And I stood up with my best wrinkled look, and I walked up to the front of the room with my shoulders back, feeling proud that I was the most important person in the room, and took my white chip. And then I went back to that meeting the next night, and somebody else was the most important person in the room, and I got my first resentment. So you all seem to play these pros and cons with me pretty well, and I thank you for that. And that started my journey in AA. I had an incredible sponsor. If you can't say that about yours, you should be able to. He taught me more about this program with his mouth shut than he ever did when we read the book together. He just literally lived this program. He took me on 12-step calls.
Answer the phone.
He took me on 12-step calls, and he showed me the value of spending some time with another human being. Not just that they had value, but that the only way that I would ever have value is to spend time with another human being or think of myself in any upstanding way. You know, I did a lot of things wrong early in sobriety. When, you know, my sponsors, they wouldn't let me talk in meetings. They said that you people did not want to have my psychological, historical BS. AA was doing just fine without that, and so I got to listen. We used to have a meeting where the tables were round. They insisted that I make coffee. I actually served the coffee in the meeting, got to walk around and fill your cups up, and they let me read occasionally, and that's all I could do publicly because they didn't feel that I was humble enough at that particular point in time. So about 4 months into sobriety, I get a call from a gal that I went through that treatment center with. She was about a week ahead of me, and then there was a kid that came in that was about 2 weeks behind me. I was 38 when I sobered up. This kid was about 20 years old, a heavy death metal rocker. And what he saw in me and why he connected to me is beyond me, but we connected to one another. And I kind of lost track of him after about 4 weeks after he had completed that treatment center. And I got a call from this gal, and he had gone back out over a relationship. Can you imagine that? Alcoholics Anonymous, a relationship, and he's back out drinking. Anyhow, she wanted me to come over and spend some time with him. And nobody had ever asked me to do anything for AA before, not directly. Anyway, and boy, that ego is really tough to manage. My chest inflated, my shoulders went back, and she was really pumping me up over the phone, and then I hung the phone up, and fear just hit me like it never hit me before. You know, I wished I'd read 3 or 4 more chapters of this, maybe read a little ahead in my meditation books. God knows what else I wished I'd have studied, so I would have something to say to this kid. And I went out the front door, dressed kind of like this, and had a stack of books. I looked like a college student going out the door. Big books, Bibles, meditation books. And I'm driving across town in my recovery mobile, the one that used to blow that beautiful gray-blue smoke. And all the way across town, I'm saying, what am I going to say to this kid, God? What am I going to say to this kid, God? All the way across town. And, when I stop talking, sometimes you get to hear this little small voice, but don't tell that to too many people out in public. As I rounded the corner on the street where this kid was, I heard this little voice say, Peter, you've been talking all of your life and you haven't said anything. All I want you to do is be with the boy. And it was like somebody just lifted the world off of my shoulders once again. The tie came off, the book stayed in the car, and I spent some time with this kid, and I drove him out to a lake where I did my fifth step, and I literally got to watch the God of my understanding work in this kid's life. He asked questions, he answered questions. I got to shake my head, I got to go mm-hmm, and all kinds of other things, but never offer anything beyond that. And that's what's happened to me a lot of the time in these rooms. I just need somebody to listen to me, or I just need somebody to sit with me while I drink a cup of coffee. And I just want to touch on a few what I consider to be miracles in my life. I found myself in between medical insurance policies for my family. And my youngest daughter was probably about 3 or 4 at the time. And she snored like a very old man. And we had all kinds of ear problems, throat problems, and she'd gone through every antibiotic you could think of, and they weren't working anymore. And so it was time for a specialist, and we got one recommended, and I ended up in this making an appointment for her to be seen by an ear, throat specialist. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to get what I need for my baby, and I'll deal with this doctor and anybody else on the backside. And one of the most valuable lessons I learned was don't tell your sponsor what you're thinking. He's liable to have some input for you that you might consider following. And I told him what I was thinking, and he said he let me run on for about 20 minutes. I had contingency plans for contingency plans. And he just looked at me and said, why don't you just tell the guy the truth? Why don't you just tell him where you're at? So I found myself in that waiting room with my daughter, and the doctor comes up, and I told him I needed to just visit with him for a second, and I told him what my situation was insurance-wise. And he said, well, let's take a look at your girl and see what we need to do. And so we went through that and told me how he was going to schedule the operating room and so on and so forth, and was going to get back to me with dates and information. And I went up to the front desk, the receptionist desk, to make my token payment as I pulled my checkbook out of my pocket. And she just looked at me and said, Mr. House, you don't owe us anything today. The doctor is going to take care of this. And I said, what? No one had ever done that for me before, or my family. No one. And so I promptly ran home and called everybody in AA and my family and just let them know how big my God was. And about 3 hours later, I got a call from the CFO of the hospital. And he said, we understand you have an insurance situation and we'd like to donate the operating room. Well, I had to make all those calls all over again. I got one bill in that whole situation, saved many, many thousands of dollars with her operation. And the one bill I got was from an anesthesiologist for about $300. Do you know what I had the longest conversation with my sponsor about? The $300 that you know what charged me when everybody else gave it to me for nothing. That's the thought process that I still found myself in after years of recovery. And things like that just continued to happen for me in recovery. My father had boundaries in place He's the only man I've ever known as a father, so I call him my father. He also adopted me. God, from the time I was about 14 or 13 years old, he even made the comment one time after I'd sobered up that I got to you too late, about 5 years too late. And I just looked at him and said, I'm not so sure that would have made a difference. Not with what I know now. But after I sobered up, he didn't let me back into his life right away. Everybody else kind of threw me the ticker tape parade in the family, and he's not drinking anymore, life is going to be great, and all that good stuff. And he says, nah, I'm going to let the boy walk it out for a while. And 3.5 years into sobriety, I got an invitation to go to my youngest sister's wedding in Phoenix. First time I was ever going to be around a lot of alcohol. And it was a Judeo-Christian wedding, and boy, these folks had money, and God, I'd never seen alcohol bars like that in my life. And I talked with my sponsor. I knew it was going to be there, and he said, just plan a way of escape. So I rented a cheap little motel room and got myself a cheap little compact car and made sure that I went to and from by myself and was able to get away from those places when I needed to. It was actually pretty funny to see my family a little tipsy after half a glass of champagne, just trying to act a little bit more social, which is something I tried to do for years with a considerably larger quantity of alcohol. But one of the things that happened there with my dad was on the last day, I'm going to back up just a hair, I got to visit with that family that I destroyed their vehicles, and they used to be my in-laws, and she used to be my wife, and they invited, I asked her if I could talk with her and if she'd meet me, so she met me for breakfast, and we just visited a little bit, and I began to make my amends, verbal amends to her. And she apparently could hear and see something different, and she went home, and she was actually living with her folks because her dad had had a stroke by now, and they invited me over for dinner. Well, I actually had 3 dinners over that house with them. And I went from the pot-smoking, alcohol-drinking loser in their eyes to the one that got away. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous does for folks. It did that for me. I stood in the driveway the last night before that I was going to see her, and we both just cried. She said, "Where was this guy when I was with you?" I said, "Right inside, scared to death to let you know he was there." And we parted ways, and it's a wonderful experience. It was a load lightning experience for me. About 2 days later, I was about to leave the night before I left, and my father had about 18 people still in town. My sister had already gone on her honeymoon. And we were going to have one last dinner, and he booked this place in a nice restaurant, and they weren't ready for us yet, so we were sitting in a waiting room or whatever out front. And when they finally called us, he told my mother, he said, "You go on in there with the rest of them. I want to talk to Peter for a minute." So he pulls me aside. He says, "I just want you to know that you've become everything that a father could ever hope for in a son. I'm not his biological son, but what a compliment. And that's the only way that he ever treated me." And I lost him in 2002, about 8 years into recovery. And there were times, I only had him for about 5 years, really had him in my life for about 5 years. But there's times that I want to feel sorry for myself because I only had him for 5 years, and then I'm reminded by some of you that haven't even had that. And I'm grateful for everything that Alcoholics Anonymous has done for me. I put that gal in Texas through nursing school, and I was fortunate enough to stay home and be Mr. Mom and do all that stuff. And some things happened, and our lives changed, and she changed, and things got pretty scary for the girls. And We ended up in a real nasty divorce, and I ended up with residential custody. We shared custody, but the girls ended up with me. That same judge that court committed me to that treatment center was the very same judge that put those girls in my care 7.5 years later. Something happens to people when they come into this program. Can't explain it, don't need to explain it. All I need to do is experience it. I keep showing up because things like that keep happening to me. My values are a little bit different today. I used to chase the God Almighty buck and assets, and that's not true. My resources are greater today than they've ever been, and I'm looking at them. When I left Texas, there was a guy that was 65 years old, and he'd been trying for 35 years to get 1 year of sobriety. And the last year I was there, he and I became friends. I wasn't his sponsor. We just spent a lot of time together at meetings. And a few days before I left to come to North Carolina, he said, "I've got something for you." And I said, "Okay." And he reached into his pocket and he handed me this. It's a peach pit. And he had whittled this thing or carved this thing into a monkey. And he just looked at me and he said, "Taken me 35 years to get this damn thing off my back for 1 year. Why don't you take it with you?" That means more to me than any dollar gift that you could ever give to me. It's those kinds of memories that I have from people in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's just one. I was kidding with some of my friends about, they wanted to know if I was going to talk about humility tonight, and I remember a Marine fighter pilot that I met when I first sobered up. He sobered up in Wichita Falls, Texas, and he was about 10 years sober at the time when I saw him for the first time, and they took us to one of their anniversary chip eating meetings, and they celebrate at the end of the meeting, and they called him up to pick up his chip, and he just looked out at the crowd and he said, I'd really like to talk about humility. And of course, at this point in time, I'm very young in sobriety, and I'm starting to ease forward on my chair in my mind saying, I'm going to get a lesson here tonight. And he continues that sentence by saying, "But there just aren't enough people here." And everybody did pretty much that. They laughed, and I didn't get it. But for the next 10 years, when he celebrated his anniversary, he made that same statement and allowed people to laugh with him at one of his character defects. And that's what you do for me too. You give me permission to laugh with you, which allows me to laugh at myself and not take myself so seriously. Life is different for me today. It's a much slower life than I've had. It wasn't easy to transition into. And I spend some time working on a part-time basis with some kids at a treatment center. They're usually here, but they went to a different meeting tonight. And it's interesting that I see the same behavior, hear the same words out of 14 to 17-year-olds that I do out of 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-year-olds that are still drinking. It gives me a chance to look at myself. It also gives me a chance to catch up on all the colorful metaphors that I haven't heard yet when they fire them at me. And but it's interesting how things don't seem to change. This book was written a long time ago, and I find myself in every page, whether it was Bill and Bob doing the writing or AA members. It's me. And I truly believe that they were inspired people to be able to do this. My sponsor told me something else, and I'll kind of wrap it up with this. He said recovery is all about relationships. All about relationships. And there's only three components, major components in every relationship, and that would be confidence, vulnerability, and authenticity. And those were pretty big words for me back then, because I kind of artificially knew what confidence was. I didn't want to go anywhere near vulnerability. And I'm still working on that authenticity thing. But a friend of mine gave me a little cartoon. I like to read this at some of the meetings that I'd speak at because it really describes the dual role that I am, or the dual man. A man in a hot air balloon realized he was lost. He saw a person on the ground and yelled down to him, "Can you help me? I don't know where I am." The man on the ground replied, "Sure, I'll help you. You are in a hot air balloon, hovering 30 feet above the ground, between 40 and 41 degrees latitude and between 59 and 60 degrees west longitude." "Wow, you must be a sponsor," said the man in the balloon. "Well, I am," said the man on the ground. "But what gave me away?" "Well," answered the balloonist, "everything you told me is technically right, but I'm still lost. Frankly, you're not much help at all, and you might even have delayed my trip." "You must be a sponsee," replied the man on the ground. The man in the balloon was amazed and said, "I am. But how did you know?" The man on the ground said, "Well, you don't know where you are or where you're going. You've risen to where you are due to a lot of hot air. You're expecting other people to solve your problems, and the fact is that you are in exactly the same position you were in before we met. But somehow, now it's my fault." Today, I am both the man in the balloon and the man on the ground. And I hope that I've had the confidence to talk from a position of vulnerability, and I've been authentic enough to connect the two. I don't ever like to end with my words because the most important ones come out of this book. You'll find it on page 164. "Still you may say, but I will not have the benefit of contact with you who write this book. We cannot be sure. God will determine that. So you must remember that your real reliance is always upon Him. He will show you how to create the fellowship that you crave." Who'd have thought that I'd have found some satisfaction for my cravings in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous? Thank you.